Good day. I hope you get a little bit entertained. If you come from a Puppet background, I'm going to mildly piss you off. If you come from a Nix background, I'm going to mildly piss you off. So I want you to know this up front. Hi, I'm Mike. I used to work at Puppet. I worked there for 8 years. I was a community member before that and after that, and I now work at a company that does Nix stuff. It's been an interesting journey. I have been obsessed with automation my entire career. I really like the power of seeing great things happen and happen automatically. It's really neat. A lot of people think you want to do automation because you want speed. I do not care that much about speed. What I actually really love is consistency. I like things to work the same way every time. And if that happens, it can also happen quickly. That's great, it's a side effect, but I like consistency. Variance is the enemy of doing things in IT. The more if statements you have, the more complex things are. Don't do them if you don't have to, so don't add if statements. All right, so my background, I started in big enterprise at Caterpillar. Yes, the company that makes giant yellow construction equipment. They also have more than, I don't know, $1 billion IT budget, like literally. So it was really fun to work there. I learned a lot. And then I went to a company, from a company of 100,000, went down to a company of 30, and that was Puppet. And then I went to Circle CI, and now I'm at Flux. So I worked at Puppet, but actually I worked at Puppet Labs. But actually, when I started contributing, it was called Reductive Labs. And I was working with them a lot. I also founded this thing called Extra Packages for Enterprise Linux. If you've ever used that add-on repository for RHEL or CentOS, I did that because I wanted Puppet and all of its kin available to RHEL users because I was one of them. Thank you. You're welcome. So I also ported Ruby to AIX. If you've never worked on AIX, I recommend not doing this. So, yeah. I packaged Passenger for the usage by Caterpillar and eventually gave that over to Reductive Labs so that they could reuse it in their enterprise offering, because that was actually my interview question there, was can you package this in an hour? We have a sales call. Yes, I can. So things I loved about Puppet. Nouns, not verbs. This was the first time I'd ever seen this. And it was, talk to me about state and don't talk to me about all the actions you have to take to get into this state. Okay, that's really neat. I don't want to think about the commands you type. I just want to know what will be there in the end. States, not actions. Abstractions of OS differences. I was a hardcore RPM distribution user. I know RPM like the back of my hand. I know crazy bugs in RPM that still exist today. All sorts of fun things. But I didn't know Debian very well. And I had to actually work on Debian once I moved into Puppet. But there was this cool tool called the Roush that I could just use, and I didn't have to know all of it because it was an abstraction layer. So that was pretty cool. There were some great integration points. Factor, Hyra, LDAP schema, and more. Shout out to LDAP schema, that was one of my favorites. But anyway, the point was there was a lot of these extension points that were really neat to work with, and these small tools that you could use in other ways that weren't just Puppet related. You can use Factor in all sorts of other jobs, and I still do. So I'd done a lot of packaging. That's kind of the background. Somebody told me to check out Nix. This happened before I even went to Puppet. They were like, hey, have you seen this thing called Nix? And I was like, you mean like Nix, like Linux, Unix? Like people call that Nix sometimes. No, that wasn't what they meant. And so there was this paper by Ilko that was, hey, this is this thing called Nix. And so I started looking into it, and I was like, okay, all right, So some Haskell programmers decided packaging just wasn't difficult enough, and they needed a whole language to do it. That was the summary that I got reading that. And then I had a few other points that I noticed. I was like, this seems super academic. Why do I want n versions of any library on my system? I thought the whole point of having shared libraries was I would always have the same thing, so it would be secure and all of this. And holy cow, the complete and utter disregard for FHS. That was crazy to me. It violated everything holy in me as being a package maintainer for Fedora and RHEL and and a little bit of Debian at that point and things like that. So it was just like, what are we doing? So the result was I didn't touch Nix for years because I was like, that is some niche tech that I'm never going to touch in my life. Never's a strong word. So I went to Puppet. I did packaging all the things. We wrote our own tooling. We built our CI system from the ground up, which was actually the most interesting problem at Puppet by far, in my opinion. Trying to figure out how you're going to build and test a thing that basically configures the systems that you're trying to build and test across 100 different operating system and chip combinations is a gnarly problem, and it's fun. I enjoyed it so much. It was great. I broke my life. What happened? All right. So we were packaging for about 100 combinations. We wrote this thing called VM Pooler, which was basically having hot things online that you could run tests to. There was a REST API call to do this. You could get a thing in a millisecond. The reason we did this is that AWS would have been way too expensive to do it and way too slow. So this all ran on a VMware backend and all that, and I don't think it really is in production there anymore. It is still in production there? All right, I don't know, it's badass. If you've never played with it, it's pretty awesome. But the whole thing was with Puppet, upgrades were the thing that was the most fearful. Changing versions of Puppet was really, really hard. And one of the things was you had to upgrade your agents, your master, you have all these things that are interconnected. And customers didn't want to do it very often. They were very scared of it. And so that meant we had to slow down how often we released, and that meant that everything else kind of got enterprisey, which is Spanish for slow. So it just wasn't very good. So people smarter than me, when I went to Circle CI, this was my second exposure to Nix. People smarter than me were using Nix to solve problems. And I was like, that thing, like the Haskell packaging thing is solving real world problems? Tell me more. And I got to learn a little bit more, and I was like, okay. So after a few years at Circle CI, GitHub Actions launched, and therefore less of us worked at Circle CI. But Phlox had called around that time and was like, hey, we're looking for somebody to run engineering there, and we think you have a great background. I had run engineering at Puppet, I had run engineering at Circle CI, and I was like, okay, I like packaging, I love developer productivity tools. I'm still a little scared of Nix, let's do it. So I went over to Phlox. And the next time, Nix wasn't even one thing when I started to read about it. I was like, it's an OS package manager. It's an OS, it's a package manager, and it's a programming language. It's literally where I was going with that. So this skit, if you don't know, is from 1975. So I use memes older than I am. But this was in the first season of Saturday Night Live. There's this fake commercial where he has this thing that looks like Ready Whip, and one person's arguing that it's a dessert topping, and the other's arguing it's a floor wax, and it's both. So it was really interesting. Anyway. So I went to Phlox because I love these things. And then I was like, why is this so complicated? Oh my gosh, Nix is so complex. Like when I talked earlier about the learning curve being a wall that you just run into, that was how it felt to me. I was just like, and I come from a packaging background, like I am not a noob in this space at all. But it was just so Oh, this is Avril Lavigne, if you don't know. This is also pretty old, but not older than me, but that's 2002. And I'm gonna explain memes here because I'm very American and I don't know what memes people get where. So I just decided I was going to explain them all and it would be stupider because of it. So I measured my learning of Nix in WTFs per minute because that was basically how I was trying to figure out, does Nix do the things I want it to do and how do I make it do the things I want it to do? And that number has decreased over time with more understanding. I am still not a Nix expert today, by the way, in any way. I don't pretend to be. One of the most fascinating moments that probably caused my maximum WTFs per minute was there was a debate about install. I turned to Tom, if you're in the Nix community, you know Tom Barrick, and I was like, I just want to install this. He's like, what do you mean by install? What do you mean, what do I mean by install? I'm going to come back to that one. But people smarter than me had been using Nix, and they were solving real problems with it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep going. All right, so I must unlearn what I have learned. Oh, crap, where have I heard this before? Oh, man, okay. So I'm going to go learn Nix. Oh, no. Oh, no. All right, I promised myself we weren't actually going to go into this tirade. By the way, if you don't know if you need Kubernetes, you don't. Okay, that's the summary of that one. Okay, so Nix was intimidating. And I started reading about all these new words to me. There was this thing like expression, and there was derivation, and there was a closure that was not with a J. It was a little bit weird. And then there was shells and inputs and outputs, and like just all these things that were new to me because I was never a functional programmer. I was never a hardcore Lisp or anything like that. So it was just kind of, okay, this is scary. There's like all these words. And then once you learn what they mean, it's really not that scary, but they were all new to me. And then I was like, okay, how do I find headers? How do I get libraries? Like this definition of install thing actually does start to matter at certain points when you're trying to compile things. It's a little weird. There's like these developer shells and there's regular shells and there's experimental features that apparently are like the beta of Gmail where it was just there for 10 years and they just call them experimental features, flakes. And so, there's just things that stick around that way. All right. So I was like, let's take a step back. Somebody said the best way to learn Nix is actually play with NixOS. And I was like, I feel like this is like just diving into the thing head first. We'll do it live. We'll do it. All right, so I was gonna build something that I'll call YARM80 Plus. YARM80 Plus is a system that finds things on the internet and puts them in my house. I'm not even gonna tell you what they are, but the name may tell you what they are. So YARM80 Plus was a thing I was building at home. And I was going to run this on Nix because I used to run it in Nomad, I ran it in Kubernetes. It was just a thing that I like to do to learn different tech. And what I learned about some of those techs was I didn't want to do them anymore. So the cool thing about nix-OS is actually there's configuration.nix is documented immaculately. It is so great. So you type man configuration.nix and you learn how to configure basically any application or package that's in nix-OS using this nix-OS module system. It's really cool. And it really isn't that complicated. And it really isn't that funky. So I was like, all right, this is starting to remind me of something that I know pretty well. So this is like a, hey, let's go set up some packages for you. And I was like, okay, this pattern is starting to look really familiar to me. Huh, that's Puppet, that's Nix, that's Puppet, that's Nix. Okay, these look pretty similar. All right, I'm starting to feel a little more at home. And then you get to some other things. This is Nix, so this is like configuring console, because that's what that's how I coordinate all of my voting in YARM80 Plus and things like that. So I was interested in this, and then I got to this point where I needed the IP address to actually be entered into the configuration file. And then I had two systems running nix-OS, so I couldn't just use the exact same configuration and copy it over there because it had different data that it needed. And this was a really hard problem for me because in Puppet, you have this thing called factor that basically sends over a report of all the diagnostics and the hardware information and the IP address and all that stuff. And then it inputs that into the catalog that gets rendered and compiled before it gets applied onto the system. Okay, so this is a catalog, but I can't load any variables into it, is basically the way this mapped into my brain. And that felt like it had really limited utility. But then I was like, huh. So this is basically like Puppet apply, but without sending over factor or custom functions, but I'm not even gonna get into all that. And so, okay, so I just need to do a thing that generates the things I need as an input before I do the things I need to do. Okay, that kind of makes sense. It's like running factor. I just need to do a thing. So I did that. And then I learned that this was called purity, which, God, that has some baggage, but here we are. Purity. Okay, so then I was like, okay, I've learned a little bit more about Nix. I've run nix-OS, and I'm skipping a whole lot of stuff because, well, time. So Nix, same package, different distro. This was the coolest thing about the benefits to me, was I can use the same thing if I'm on Debian, if I'm on RHEL, if I'm on ARM, if I'm on anything else. Like, I was just able to start using the exact same versions of packages, and oh my gosh. So I had accidentally invented Nix kind of at Puppet by the time I was done with it, and it was a really, really bad implementation. If I had to do it again, I would probably do it differently. But Nix had this benefit of reproducibility. Earlier, I talked about consistency. Turns out reproducibility and consistency are basically synonyms in this case, and they're pretty great. It's cross-platform. That's pretty badass. It's really nice for trying out new software, because you can just kind of do like a Nix install or a Nix run and just have a shell with the thing running there and like play with it and then throw it away if you hate it, or you don't know what you're doing, which is half the time at least. Less time in CI, because if I've already built the thing and I've already run the tests on that artifact, I know it's the exact same artifact, so I don't have to do it again. Okay, now we're speaking my language. As somebody who worked at a CI system that built one from the ground up at Puppet and worked at Circle CI, I was like, this has some different interesting benefits. There's this giant package repository. It's allegedly the most robust software catalog in the world, or software repository in the world. And I say allegedly because there are multiple people that claim that. So that's just why I'm going to say that. It is very gigantic, though. But people smarter than me were solving problems using Nix. And so I was like, okay, I've got this really complex thing with these weird names. Wait a second. So Puppet has a lot of these things. They switched Clojure. They use Clojure with a J, not with an S. But outside of that, it was like, this is really similar. This is a lot the same. Okay. So I start looking at these side by side, and yeah, that comes up, where it's like, hey, this is basically the same thing. This is a meme from the American version of The Office. I have never seen this show, but I know this meme very well. So there were debates about what install means. Still fascinates me every time I think about this moment. Pedantic is a thing that is in common between Puppet users and Nix users, is they are all pedantic. And the reason I know this, and the reason this exact Slack message was snipped here, is this person worked for me at Puppet and works for me at Phlox. So I know the properties carry over because it's the same person. Desire for cross-platform work exists both in Puppet and Nix. That's a cool thing. They're both declarative, roughly. I mean, declarative you can debate when you start getting variable substitution and side effects and things like that, but they're both declarative. We'll say that. They're both really into automation. Like, you can just kind of do stuff and magic happens and you can watch it happen and it's great. There's a lot of ideological purity in both communities where, like, don't violate my mental model. You are wrong. No, it's the children who are wrong. Like, it's like these moments where you are just incorrect and you get told so many, many times. Not necessarily the best trait in both communities, but holy cow, it's there. A little bit of a superiority complex is probably what I would say kind of exists in both communities. And there's also some community fun in both communities, and I'm not going to get into that at all. But you can read up on it if you really want to. So what were the real lessons here of the Puppet guy who was hardcore into Puppet, or hardcore into traditional distro packaging, learning Nix? Well, it's a rolling release. That actually is one of the biggest differences in working with Nix and nix-OS than anything else I've worked on. I play with Gentoo. I love Gentoo. I use it a lot at home for random stuff, which is rolling release. I had never thought about it in a business context at all because seriously, it was Gentoo, and why would I ever do that? But when you started building Phlox, you start thinking about, okay, Nix packages is changing hundreds of times a day. I need to figure out how I'm going to incorporate these changes and all these things. A rolling release is a difficult thing. It's a new thing. A lot of the tooling you have to build to manage Nix in an enterprise is actually managing a rolling release. It doesn't have as much to do with Nix itself as it does a rolling release in some cases. I love that I can debug stuff with strace. I don't have to launch a debug pod. I don't have to write more YAML. It's amazing. So I can learn about new tech pretty easily. Like I said, I can do like a Nix shell and just start some new stuff and start playing with it. And I really like that. And what happens when I don't want it? It gets garbage collected. It's sick. That part's pretty great. nix-OS uses systemd better than almost every distribution that I've seen. And it integrates with it. And there are systemd haters out there, and I am sometimes one of them. But I do like when something's using the features of like a mainstream tool and it's advancing and they're like, no, we're going to take advantage of this one and this one and this one. You know, I'm using user space system timers and user time, like all this stuff that basically a lot of other distros just kind of ignored. So I thought it was pretty cool. Package across platforms. Oh, sorry. I switched from nix-OS here to Nix because there are two different things here. Nix, the package manager, which is actually the thing that I use every day. nix-OS, I run it, but I don't actually touch it a lot because it kind of just works. So, but I package across platforms using Nix. Rollbacks and upgrades are awesome because you can have multiple versions of everything and it's just a symlink change. That's pretty great. So generations, things like that. Enterprises actually have been trying to build this for years, and some of them do it in their own custom way. I know, like at Caterpillar, there was this whole WebSphere symlink manager that did things, and all it did basically in the end was say, I want this version and this tarball to be pointed at active at the time. And like, okay. Appliance construction. If I was going to ship an appliance doing anything these days, I would use nix-OS and I wouldn't even think twice about it. And the reason is I can have basically my whole new set of changes, and if it doesn't work, I can just roll back to the last one and my customer is no longer in any problem area. Network vendors. If you are building network switches and you base them on Linux, which by the way, almost all of them do, you have chosen the wrong distribution to build your network switch upon. Ask me how I know. But wait, there's more. This is Ron Popeil. I don't know if you guys know him. He invented all sorts of cool stuff, but he's basically the inventor of the modern infomercial, and I think that's really cool. If you're ever up really late at night, infomercials are a thing in the US, and they are amazing. So there's these developer workflows, which I didn't get into at all. There's so much power here. You can like CI normalize your stuff. So like you can actually give like a receipt, say I've already built the artifact, done the test, don't do it again. You can skip it all, it's really cool. There's some really finicky stuff in some of this stuff, but it's really neat once you understand it. Trying to keep things pure and not get them impure, because there's always a temptation to just throw an impure flag on everything, because it will make it easier. But it will not give you all the benefits that you're looking for, probably. I don't have time to get into all the things I want to get into on developer workflows, but luckily there's this product, okay? It's super cool. There's a booth in the other room. That's all I'm going to say about it. Please go check it out. But nix-OS So in a summary here, nix-OS is awesome at single systems management. It's awesome at multi-system management with a little bit of addition and help and integration once you understand how to either feed it new information and things like that. Fleets took more planning. I had to figure some things out that were just not out of the box there with nix-OS to me. There might be great ways to do this that I just don't understand, by the way. I am not the smartest Nix user in this room, or even close to it. So, cross-platform packaging needs. I love using Nix for that. I try out new software and I use reproducibility. Those are my benefits of Nix. For Puppet, I like when I have existing systems to manage. Puppet's pretty great. If I can't take them down, rebuild them, whatever, keep them in state. If you have people that will just twiddle bits all the time, it's kind of good to have Puppet because it will report on what's been changing. On Nix, you just boot back into the thing and it's like, I don't know what you did, but it's gone now. Whereas on Puppet, you get a report to say, hey, this thing was changed and it's been modified back or whatever. So you at least have a record of what happened, which is nice. My least favorite things about Puppet, the complexity of the server stack. Particularly if you ran Puppet Enterprise, there are 13 different configuration grammars and how to configure Puppet Enterprise. Again, ask me how I know. SSL fun is never fun. If you know like a lot of X509 commands off the top of your head, you've been doing a job that wasn't fun for too long. And then part of my least favorite things about Puppet is some company changes that may have been talked about earlier today at other talks. So my least favorite things about Nix and Nix stuff. Nix packages, the naming of certain packages bugs me so much. No one has ever wanted bash without readline when they installed bash. No one has ever wanted that. So you always want bash interactive. Why is it not just called bash and the other one called bash non-interactive, or tiny bash, or small bash, or bash without all the features you were looking for? I don't know. The docs for some things are non-existent. Like as good as the configuration.nix man page is, it's awesome. And other things, it's, hey, just go read the source code. And I'm like, remember how I said it looks like Haskell and it scares me? That part's still true. So, but sometimes we have to read the source, or I just ask Tom. Version's not really a first class in the piece of metadata for packaging. There's just like, there's these fields, but there's a thing, and you're like, well, wait, what version is this, and which build is this? Like, they're not really trackable over time because packages were not the only use case intended for Nix, and so they didn't create this from the ground up that way. There's just some oddities there. If you have version 1.2.3 of a piece of software, you could have a new version of 1.2.3, a new build of it tomorrow because it's rebuilt against a new library underneath or something, and there's no indicator that that's a different build other than maybe the timestamp is different. In every other distribution, there's a thing called release, which is basically the package version number. And so like it might be 1.2.3-1, 1.2.3-2, and that doesn't exist in Nix by default. That's a weird thing to me. And then the experimental features we already talked about. So, should you change if you're a Puppet person and try and use Nix? Yeah, only if you declare your intentions ahead of time. Thanks, I'm Mike Stahnke. I run engineering at Phlox, and I hope you enjoyed this talk on Puppet and Nix. Thank you.